The crystal chandelier above the banquet hall cast fractured light across 200 faces as my husband, Julian Harrington, stood at the podium accepting his Entrepreneur of the Year award. I sat at the table closest to the stage, wearing the emerald dress he'd chosen for me, smiling the smile I'd perfected over 12 years of marriage. "I couldn't have done this without my team," Julian said, his voice carrying that practiced humility that made investors open their wallets. My CFO, my board members, and of course, my beautiful wife Victoria. He gestured toward me, and I raised my champagne glass slightly, acknowledging the applause. Though I'll be honest, he paused for the laugh he knew was coming when people ask what my wife does. I have to tell them she's just a teacher. Not exactly building empires, but someone's got to shape young minds, right? Just a teacher. The room erupted in polite laughter. A few people glanced at me with something like pity. Others didn't bother looking at all. I kept my face arranged in that same pleasant expression, took a sip of champagne, and felt the final piece of my carefully constructed plan click into place. Because here's what Julian didn't know. I wasn't just a teacher. I was Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington, education policy expert, curriculum developer, and as of 3 months ago, the silent architect of the city's largest education reform initiative. The initiative that would reshape 20 schools across the district. The initiative funded by a $50 million grant I'd personally secured. The initiative that would, by this time next year, make Julian's dismissive comment a moment of legendary irony. But in that moment, sitting in that banquet hall with 200 people laughing at my expense, I simply smiled. Because people who underestimate you don't see you coming until it's far too late. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He stepped down from the podium, kissed my cheek, a performance for the cameras, and immediately turned to shake hands with the mayor. I stood, smoothed my dress, and excused myself to the restroom. In the marble-tiled sanctuary of the ladies' room, I finally allowed my mask to slip. I gripped the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection. My mother's Taiwanese features stared back high cheekbones. Dark eyes that Julian had once said reminded him of jade, but now barely looked at. I'd straightened my naturally wavy hair for tonight, worn the dress he'd picked, played the role of supportive wife while he'd reduced 12 years of my career to just a teacher. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer, Naomi Fletcher. Board meeting confirmed for Monday. Everything's ready. I typed back, perfect. Another text appeared, this one from my best friend and colleague, Angela Brooks. Saw the live stream. Are you okay? Better than okay, I replied. The trap is set. I reapplied my lipstick, a deep red called Vindication that I'd bought specifically for tonight, and returned to the banquet hall. Julian was holding court with a group of venture capitalists, his arm around his CFO, a woman named Sloane Pierce who wore dresses too tight and ambition too obvious. She laughed at something he said, her hand resting on his forearm just a beat too long. I'd known about Julian and Sloane for 4 months. Had known he'd been funneling company money into an offshore account for 6. Had known he'd been planning to divorce me and marry her for 3. He thought I was oblivious, lost in my little teaching job, too absorbed in grading papers to notice his late nights at the office. He'd underestimated the one skill teachers develop better than anyone: paying attention, noticing patterns, seeing what's hidden in plain sight. There you are, darling, Julian said when he finally noticed me standing near the table. Come meet Walter Simmons. He's interested in expanding into educational technology. I shook Walter's hand, smiled politely, let Julian steer the conversation. Educational technology was code for buying up public school data and monetizing it. I'd written 2 policy papers on why it was predatory. Papers that Julian had never bothered to read. Your husband tells me you're a teacher, Walter said, his tone suggesting he was being polite to the help. I am, I replied. High school English. I teach students to think critically, analyze texts, and recognize manipulation when they see it. Walter laughed uncomfortably. Julian shot me a look. Don't embarrass me that I pretended not to see. Victoria's being modest, Sloane interjected, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Teaching is such important work. My sister's a teacher too. It's perfect for women who want work-life balance, isn't it? Not as demanding as real corporate careers. I took a slow sip of champagne, let the moment breathe, then smiled at Sloane. You're absolutely right. Teaching gives me so much free time. Summers off, weekends mostly free. I've been able to pursue all sorts of projects Julian doesn't even know about. Something flickered in Sloane's expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint that she'd miscalculated. But Julian was already steering the conversation toward investment opportunities. And the moment passed. The evening wore on. More handshakes, more small talk, more of Julian's friends and colleagues treating me like an accessory. Around 11, Julian suggested we leave. We rode home in the back of a hired car, silent except for the sound of him typing on his phone. You were quiet tonight, he said without looking up. You were busy. I didn't want to interrupt. That's good. These events are important for my career. I need you to understand that. I understand perfectly. We pulled into the driveway of our house, a modern glass and steel structure in the city's most expensive neighborhood. Julian had designed it himself, all sharp angles and cold surfaces. I'd wanted something warmer, cozier, with space for a garden. But Julian's taste had won, as Julian's taste always won. Inside, he poured himself a scotch and disappeared into his home office. I changed out of the emerald dress, hung it carefully in the closet, and opened my laptop. The document I'd been working on for the past 4 months filled the screen. A comprehensive dossier on Julian's financial misconduct, his affair with Sloane, his plans to restructure his company in a way that would leave me with nothing in the divorce he was planning. Every bank statement, every incriminating email, every document I'd need to protect myself was there, organized, backed up in 3 separate locations. But more than that, I had my own plan. Not just defense offense. A way to turn Julian's betrayal into something that would matter, something that would help others, something that would ensure my name meant something beyond Julian Harrington's wife. My phone rang. Angela. You sure you're okay? She asked when I answered. I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. Did you see his face when he said it? Just a teacher. Like it was nothing. Like the past 12 years of my career were a hobby. He's an ass. He's always been an ass. I don't know why it took you so long to see it. Because I was in love with the person I thought he was. And because I was busy building something real while he was busy chasing status. When are you going to tell him? Monday. After the board meeting. After everything's finalized. I want him to read about it in the news like everyone else. Poetic. Necessary. After we hung up, I sat at my desk looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there were the students I'd taught over the years, the curriculum I'd developed, the policies I'd shaped, the education reform initiative I'd spent 2 years designing and 3 months secretly implementing. Julian thought teaching was small, insignificant, just something to fill my days while he built his empire. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been, about teaching, about me, about what happened when you underestimated someone who'd spent years learning how to see what others missed. I closed my laptop and went to bed. Julian came in sometime after 2, smelling like scotch and Sloane's perfume. He didn't think I knew, didn't think I'd noticed, didn't think just a teacher could outwit him. That was his first mistake, and by Monday morning, the whole city would know it. I woke at 5:30 Sunday morning, as I did every weekend, and went for my run through the city's Riverside Park. The dawn light was soft, forgiving, turning the river into liquid silver. Running was where I did my best thinking, where I processed the complicated emotions that came with systematically dismantling my marriage. Because that's what I was doing. Not running away from Julian, but carefully, strategically ensuring that when I left, I'd leave with everything I'd earned and everything I deserved. And he'd be left facing the consequences of treating his wife like she was invisible. The park was mostly empty at this hour, a few other runners, some dog walkers, the homeless man named Frank, who slept under the bridge and always waved when I passed. I waved back, as I always did. Frank had more integrity than my husband. Back home, I showered and changed into comfortable clothes. Julian was still asleep, or pretending to be. Sundays were the one day I had completely to myself. He spent them golfing with investors or, more recently, with Sloane in the apartment he thought I didn't know about. I made coffee and opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. 3 new emails from the superintendent's office, 2 from board members, and 1 from the reporter who'd be breaking the story tomorrow. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The first email confirmed the board meeting for Monday at 9 a.m. The second contained final budget approvals for the education initiative. The third was from Superintendent Harold Yates, asking if I was certain I wanted to proceed with the announcement. More certain than ever, I typed back, "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. press conference. Everything's arranged." I'd been working with Harold for 18 months on the education reform initiative. He'd been skeptical at first. I was just a high school teacher, after all, with no administrative experience. But I'd spent 5 years developing curriculum frameworks that had been adopted by schools across the state. I'd written policy papers that had influenced legislation. And I'd secured the $50 million grant from the Hamilton Education Foundation by demonstrating exactly how my comprehensive reform model would transform struggling schools into centers of excellence. Harold had eventually come around, especially when I'd shown him the data, the research, the carefully constructed implementation plan that addressed every concern, anticipated every objection, and mapped out 5 years of sustainable growth. "You're either brilliant or crazy," he'd said when I'd first presented the plan. "Why not both?" I'd replied. The education initiative, officially called the Metropolitan Academic Excellence Program, would restructure 20 schools across the district. New curriculum frameworks based on my models. Professional development for teachers. Community partnerships. Technology integration that actually served students instead of extracting their data. Everything I'd learned in 12 years of teaching, synthesized into a comprehensive reform model. And because I'd secured the grant personally, because the Hamilton Foundation had awarded it specifically to support my vision, my name was attached to every document, every press release, every official communication. By tomorrow afternoon, everyone in the city would know Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington's name, just not as Julian's wife. As the architect of the city's most ambitious education reform in 50 years, I spent Sunday morning reviewing the press materials. The photographs showed me in my classroom, working with students, not standing beside Julian at charity galas. The quotes emphasized my credentials: doctorate in education policy, 12 years teaching experience, 5 published curriculum frameworks, 3 policy papers that had influenced state legislation. Julian had never read any of them, had never asked about my research, had introduced me at parties as my wife, the teacher in that tone that suggested it was sweet, quaint, something I did to fill my time. He'd been so busy building his tech company that he'd never noticed I was building something too. Something bigger, something that would last longer than whatever app his company was currently developing. Around noon, my mother called. How was the banquet?" She always started with Mandarin when she wanted to have a serious conversation. My mother, Mei Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan 30 years ago and built a successful accounting firm. She understood ambition, understood business, and had never particularly liked Julian. He called me just a teacher in front of 200 people. Silence. Then, "And you did what?" Smiled. Said nothing. Let him think I was fine with it. Good girl. Let your enemies think they've won before you strike. I taught you that. You did. And tomorrow, I strike. Tell me. I explained the education initiative, the grant, the press conference. My mother listened without interrupting another thing she'd taught me, that real power came from listening more than speaking. "Does Julian know?" she asked when I finished. "No. He thinks I'm just teaching my classes, grading papers, living my small little life. He's a fool. I told you this when you married him. You did. But you were in love. And you thought he would see your value eventually. Did he? No. He saw someone convenient, someone who would support his career, host his parties, and not demand too much attention. He married me thinking I'd be content to be Mrs. Julian Harrington forever. And now he's going to learn that I was never his wife. I was always myself. He just wasn't paying attention." My mother laughed, that sharp, bright sound that meant she was proud of me. "When are you filing for divorce?" "Tuesday. After the press conference, after the news breaks, after the whole city knows my name. I want him to realize what he lost the same moment. Everyone else realizes what he never appreciated." Dramatic. I approve. "Do you have a good lawyer?" "The best. Naomi Fletcher." "I know Naomi. Excellent choice. She'll take him apart." We talked for another hour about logistics, about finances, about the apartment I'd already secured across town. My mother had helped with the down payment, done it quietly so Julian wouldn't know. She'd also helped me move my personal belongings out over the past month, bit by bit, so he wouldn't notice anything missing. Will he fight the divorce? My mother asked. Probably. But I have documentation of everything. The affair, the financial irregularities in his company, his plans to restructure assets before filing. Naomi says it'll be quick. He'll settle rather than risk exposure. You've thought of everything. I'm a teacher. Thinking ahead is what we do. After we hung up, I made lunch and reviewed my notes for tomorrow's press conference. I'd practiced my remarks dozens of times, had them nearly memorized, but I wanted to be perfect. Wanted every word to land with precision. The press conference would announce the education initiative. I'd explain the grant, the implementation plan, the timeline. I'd take questions, provide details, demonstrate my expertise. And then, almost as an aside, I'd mention that while I was honored to have my name associated with the program, I wanted to emphasize that this was about students, not personal recognition. That line about not seeking personal recognition would be particularly sweet given Julian's constant pursuit of awards and media attention. The irony wouldn't be lost on the reporters in the room. Around 4, Julian came home from wherever he'd actually been. Golf with investors, he claimed, but his phone location history, which I'd been tracking for months, showed he'd been at Sloane's apartment. Good day? I asked, not looking up from my laptop. Productive. Closed a deal with a new investor. How was your day? Productive, too. Graded some papers, caught up on emails. That's nice. He disappeared into his office without asking anything more specific. 12 years of marriage, and he'd never learned to ask follow-up questions about my work. I spent the evening finishing my preparations. By 9, I was ready. Every document reviewed, every talking point memorized, every contingency planned for. Tomorrow would change everything. I went to bed early. Julian came in late again, and I pretended to be asleep. He believed what he wanted to believe, that I was content, oblivious, just a teacher living my small life. Tomorrow, the whole city would learn different. Monday morning, I woke at 5 and dressed carefully. Not in the clothes. Julian preferred the soft, feminine pieces that made me look decorative but in my professional best. A navy suit that I'd bought with my own money. My mother's jade earrings, hair pulled back in a neat bun. Minimal makeup. I wanted to look competent, authoritative, like someone who commanded respect. Julian was still sleeping when I left the house at 7. I'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Early meeting at school. Don't wait up tonight, department dinner. The lie came easily. I'd been practicing smaller lies for months, preparing for this moment when I'd tell the one lie that mattered, pretending everything was fine until the moment I revealed it wasn't. The superintendent's office was in the district headquarters downtown, a modern building that always smelled like coffee and photocopier ink. Harold was waiting in the conference room with the board members, 7 people who'd reviewed my proposals, approved my plans, and signed off on everything. You ready for this? Harold asked, pouring coffee into a mug with the district logo. I've been ready for 2 years. The press conference is at 10. We'll do the board vote first, make it official, then announce it to the media. And you're certain about the naming? The board voted last week. It's decided. The flagship school, Franklin High, will be renamed the Chen Harrington Academy for Academic Excellence. My name on a school. The school where I'd taught for the past 6 years. Where I'd developed the curriculum models that had become the foundation for the entire initiative. My name would be on the building, on the letterhead, on every official document. Julian had wanted his name on buildings, had donated money to get his name on a university business school wing, had fought for recognition, demanded acknowledgement, needed everyone to know his importance. And I'd done it differently. I'd done the work first, built something real. And the recognition had come because the work mattered, not because I demanded it. The board meeting started at 8. I presented the final implementation timeline, answered questions, clarified budget allocations. At 8:45, they took a formal vote to approve the Metropolitan Academic Excellence Program. 7 votes in favor, 0 opposed. Congratulations, Dr. Chen Harrington, the board chair said, shaking my hand. This is going to transform our district. At 9, the press started arriving. 10 reporters, 3 TV cameras, journalists from the major newspapers and education publications. They set up in the press room while I reviewed my notes one final time. Harold gave me a reassuring nod. "You've got this. Just speak from your expertise. Let the work speak for itself." At exactly 10 a.m., we walked into the press room. I stood at the podium, looking out at the cameras and reporters, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't Victoria Harrington, Julian's decorative wife. This was Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington, education policy expert. And I was about to claim the recognition I'd earned. "Good morning. I'm Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington, and I'm here to announce the Metropolitan Academic Excellence Program, a comprehensive education reform initiative that will transform 20 schools across our district over the next 5 years." I spoke for 15 minutes, explaining the grant, the research, the implementation plan. I cited data, referenced studies, demonstrated the depth of expertise I'd built over 12 years of teaching and research. The reporters took notes, asked questions. How would the program be funded? What made this model different from previous reform efforts? What evidence suggested it would work? I answered everything, calmly, thoroughly, with the confidence that came from actually knowing what I was talking about. This wasn't corporate speak or buzzwords. This was real knowledge, earned through years of work that Julian had dismissed as just teaching. One final note, I said at the end of the press conference. The board has decided to rename Franklin High School, where I currently teach and where much of this curriculum was developed. It will become the Chen Harrington Academy for Academic Excellence. While I'm honored by this recognition, I want to emphasize that this initiative is about students, not personal accolades. The work is what matters. More questions, more answers. Then it was over, and the reporters scattered to file their stories. Harold shook my hand. That was perfect. Authoritative, knowledgeable, humble. You're going to be on the evening news. That's the idea. I checked my phone. 3 texts from Angela. Watching the press conference online. You're amazing. Julian is going to lose his mind. 1 text from my mother. Proud of you? Nah. Air. Now finish it. Nothing from Julian. He was probably in meetings. Had no idea what I'd just done. I went to school to what would soon be the Chen Harrington Academy and taught my afternoon classes. My students were excited. Word had already spread about the press conference. Several asked if it was true that the school would be renamed. It's true, I told them. And everything we've built in this classroom, the critical thinking, the analysis, the intellectual rigor that's going to be the model for 20 schools. One student, a girl named Keisha who'd struggled initially but had grown into one of my strongest writers, raised her hand. "Miss H, this is because of you? You did this? I designed the framework, but you all did the work. You proved that when we expect excellence and provide support, students can achieve extraordinary things." After school, I drove to Naomi Fletcher's office. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a reputation for destroying unfaithful husbands in divorce proceedings. "I watched the press conference," Naomi said when I walked into her office. "Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. By tonight, everyone in the city will know your name. That's the point. I want Julian to realize what he married, what he dismissed, what he's about to lose. Speaking of which, are you ready to file? Tomorrow morning. I want him to read about the education initiative tonight, realize I'm not who he thought I was, and then get served divorce papers tomorrow. Maximum impact." Naomi smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "I like the way you think. I have everything prepared. The asset division is straightforward since you kept your finances separate. The evidence of his affair and financial misconduct is documented. He'll settle. What about his company? You're entitled to half its value as of the filing date. His attempts to restructure and hide assets before divorcing you? That's fraud. He'll settle to avoid criminal charges. Good. We spent 2 hours reviewing every detail. The asset list. The evidence folders. The settlement terms I'd accept. By the time I left Naomi's office, everything was ready. I drove home as evening fell. The news was already out. My phone kept buzzing with notifications. The story was trending on local social media. Teacher secures $50M grant for education reform. New academic excellence program to transform district schools. Franklin High to be renamed for curriculum developer Dr. Chen Harrington. My name. Everywhere. Attached to something real, something meaningful, something that would outlast Julian's tech company and his need for recognition. I pulled into the driveway at 7. Julian's car was already there, unusual for a Monday night. The lights were on inside. I took a deep breath, smoothed my suit jacket, and walked into the house. Julian was in the living room, his laptop open, his face flushed with anger. What the hell is this? He turned the laptop toward me. The local news website showed my photograph from the press conference, the headline about the education initiative. It's my job, I said calmly. The one you called just teaching on Saturday night. You secured a $50 million grant? You're restructuring 20 schools? And you didn't tell me? You never asked about my work, Julian. In 12 years, you never once asked what I was actually doing at school beyond grading papers. This is, you're on the news. They're renaming a school after you. The Chen Harrington Academy? Yes. The board voted last week. It's official. He stood, pacing the room like a trapped animal. You did this without telling me? Without consulting me? That's my name too, Harrington. You're using my name for this? It's my name too. I've been Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington for 12 years. Did you think I'd given up my maiden name entirely? Or did you just never pay attention? This is people are going to think that your wife is accomplished, intelligent, capable of extraordinary work? Yes, Julian. That's exactly what they're going to think. You made me look like a fool. On Saturday, I said you were just a teacher, and now this. People are going to remember that. Yes, they are. That's the point. He stared at me, and I saw the moment he realized something had shifted, that the woman standing in front of him wasn't the one he'd dismissed on Saturday night. Wasn't the decorative wife who'd smiled through his insults? What's happening here, Victoria? Justice? I said quietly. You spent 12 years treating me like an accessory. Like my work didn't matter. Like I was less than you because I chose teaching instead of corporate success. And I let you think that because I was busy actually accomplishing something real. You're angry about Saturday night, about what I said, but you're overreacting. I'm not angry, Julian. I'm done. There's a difference. Done with what? With you. With this marriage. With pretending your disrespect is acceptable. The color drained from his face. You're not serious. I've never been more serious. You'll be served divorce papers tomorrow morning. Victoria, you're upset. Let's talk about this. We can work through this. There's nothing to work through. You cheated on me with Sloan for 4 months. You've been funneling company money into offshore accounts. You were planning to divorce me anyway. You just wanted to restructure your assets first so I'd get nothing. He went completely still. I'm a teacher, Julian. I notice things. Patterns, changes, details. You thought I was oblivious, but I've been documenting everything for months. You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention. Something you never bothered to do with me. Victoria, please. We can fix this. I made mistakes, but we can. No, we can't. Because you don't respect me. You never did. And I'm done accepting less than I deserve. I walked past him toward the stairs. Where are you going? To pack. I'm staying somewhere else tonight. The movers will come for the rest of my things later this week. Victoria, wait. But I was already climbing the stairs, leaving him standing in the living room with his laptop still open to the news story about my accomplishment. The accomplishment he'd dismissed. The work he'd never valued. Tomorrow he'd be served divorce papers. Tomorrow, the city would be talking about Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington's extraordinary achievement. Tomorrow, everyone would know that just a teacher had accomplished something his business awards could never match. Tonight, I packed my bags and left the glass and steel house that had never felt like home. Left the man who'd never seen me. Left the life I'd outgrown years ago without realizing it. And as I drove away from that house for the last time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. I spent Monday night at the apartment I'd secretly leased 3 months ago, a 1-bedroom in an older building near the university. With hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves and windows that overlooked a tree-lined street. It was nothing like Julian's architectural showcase. It was warm. It was mine. Angela came over with wine and takeout. We sat on the floor of my mostly empty living room. I'd been slowly moving furniture in over the past month and watched the evening news coverage of the press conference. "You were magnificent," Angela said, raising her wine glass. Articulate, authoritative, confident. I wanted to applaud through my computer screen. It felt good. After years of being introduced as Julian's wife, it felt good to be recognized for my actual work. "Have you heard from him since you left?" 17 calls. 23 texts. I haven't responded to any of them. What's he saying? I pulled up my phone and scrolled through the messages. They'd started angry. "You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. You're making a huge mistake." Then they'd turned pleading. "Please come home. I love you. We can fix this." The most recent one, sent 20 minutes ago, was different. I talked to Sloan. "It's over. She means nothing. Please give me another chance." "Too little, too late," Angela said, reading over my shoulder. "Years too late. But he still doesn't get it. He thinks this is about the affair. He doesn't understand that the affair was just a symptom of the real problem. Which is? He never saw me, never valued what I do, never recognized that teaching isn't a hobby or a time filler, it's a calling. And I'm damn good at it. Good enough to secure a $50 million grant. Good enough to restructure 20 schools. Good enough to have a school renamed in my honor. But he couldn't see that because he was too busy looking at himself. We ate Chinese food and watched as the story continued to develop. The Education Initiative was the lead story on 2 news channels. The local paper had already posted an online article. Social media was buzzing with reactions. One tweet had gone viral. "Remember when Julian Harrington said his wife was just a teacher? Well, that teacher just secured $50M to transform 20 schools and got a school renamed after her. Maybe being just a teacher is more impressive than being just an entrepreneur." "Oh, that's gonna sting," Angela said, showing me her phone. "Good, it should." My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Dr. Chen Harrington? This is Melissa Carter, from the State Department of Education. I'm calling to congratulate you on the Metropolitan Academic Excellence Program. The governor's office would like to discuss potentially expanding your model statewide." I sat up straighter. "Thank you. I'd be very interested in discussing that." "Excellent. Are you available for a meeting later this week?" "I am. Just send me the details and I'll be there." After I hung up, Angela stared at me. "The governor's office wants to expand your program statewide?" "Apparently." "Victoria, do you realize what this means? This isn't just about 20 schools anymore. This could reshape education across the entire state." "I know. And Julian is going to watch it happen from the outside, wondering how he missed this, how he married someone capable of this, and never noticed." The next morning, I woke early and dressed in another professional suit. Today, Julian would be served divorce papers at his office. Today, the formal dissolution of our marriage would begin. Naomi had arranged for a professional process server to deliver the papers at 11 a.m. I'd be teaching my second period class when it happened, standing in front of 30 students discussing Shakespeare's Macbeth and the corrupting influence of unchecked ambition. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 10:30, my phone buzzed. A text from Naomi. "Server is in position. Papers will be delivered in 30 minutes. I took a deep breath and returned my attention to my students. We were analyzing Lady Macbeth's soliloquy, discussing how she'd manipulated her husband's ambition for her own purposes. "Miss H," one student asked, "why didn't Macbeth see what Lady Macbeth was doing? Why didn't he realize she was manipulating him?" "Because people see what they want to see," I explained. Macbeth wanted power, and Lady Macbeth told him he deserved it. He didn't question her motives because questioning would have forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. It's easier to believe a comforting lie than a difficult truth. At 11:05, my phone buzzed again. "Naomi, papers delivered. He's been served." I imagined Julian in his corner office, opening the envelope, reading the petition for divorce, seeing the evidence attachments, the documentation of his affair, his financial misconduct, his plans to hide assets. Realizing that I'd known everything for months, my phone started ringing. Julian. I declined the call and put my phone on silent. Lunch period. My phone had 32 missed calls and 47 text messages, all from Julian. I didn't read them. Instead, I ate lunch in Angela's classroom and discussed the morning's news coverage with her. "You're trending again," she said, showing me her phone. "The story about the education initiative is everywhere, and people are making the connection to Julian's comment on Saturday night. Let them. Actions speak louder than words. He said I was just a teacher. I showed the world what teachers are actually capable of accomplishing. After school, I drove to Naomi's office for a meeting about the divorce proceedings. He called me 8 times this morning," Naomi said. "His lawyer called 6 times. They want to negotiate. Already? Your evidence is damning. The affair, the financial irregularities, the asset manipulation they know they can't win at trial. Julian wants to settle quickly and quietly. What are they offering?" Naomi slid a document across her desk. "Half the current value of his company. The house goes to you. He pays legal fees. Clean break, no spousal support in either direction." I reviewed the numbers. It was fair, more than fair actually. The house alone was worth $3 million. Half his company was worth another $8 million. I'd walk away with over $11 million plus my retirement accounts and personal assets. "What does he want in return?" I asked. "Non-disclosure agreement. He doesn't want you talking to the media about the affair or his financial misconduct." "No." Naomi raised her eyebrows. "No? I won't lie if asked directly, but I also won't go to the media. I have better things to do than publicly humiliate him. My work speaks for itself. But I won't sign an NDA that prevents me from being honest if the question is asked. That's fair. I'll counter-propose a modified agreement. You won't actively seek media attention about the divorce, but you retain the right to be truthful if directly questioned." Perfect. We spent 2 hours reviewing every aspect of the settlement proposal. By the time I left, I was satisfied that I'd protected my interests without compromising my principles. Wednesday morning, the state education department meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I drove to the Capitol, an hour away, and met with Governor Helena Morrison's deputy chief of staff and 3 education policy advisors. "Dr. Chen Harrington, thank you for coming," the deputy chief started. "We've reviewed your Metropolitan Academic Excellence Program proposal in detail. It's comprehensive, research-based, and exactly the kind of innovation we need statewide. Thank you. I've spent 12 years developing and refining this model. We can see that. The question is scalability. Can this model work in rural districts, in smaller communities with fewer resources?" I'd anticipated this question. I pulled out a supplementary document. I'd prepared a modified version of the program designed specifically for smaller districts, with adjusted budgets and implementation timelines. "I've already adapted the framework for different contexts," I explained, walking them through the modifications. "The core principles remain the same: high expectations, comprehensive support, data-driven decision-making, but the implementation scales to fit available resources." The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, they were discussing not just adoption, but asking me to lead the statewide implementation. "We'd need to create a new position," the deputy chief said. "State Director of Academic Excellence. It would be a cabinet-level appointment. You'd oversee the rollout across all districts, work directly with the governor, shape education policy for the entire state. That's a significant role. It requires a significant person. Someone with your expertise, your vision, your proven track record. The governor would like to meet with you personally to discuss it. Are you interested?" Was I interested in reshaping education statewide? In expanding my influence beyond 20 schools to potentially hundreds? In moving from just a teacher to one of the most powerful education positions in the state? "Yes," I said. "I'm very interested." Wednesday evening, I met my mother for dinner at her favorite Taiwanese restaurant. She ordered for both of us in Mandarin beef noodle soup, dumplings, stir-fried vegetables, and listened as I recounted the past 3 days. "So in 3 days," she summarized, "you've become famous for your education work, filed for divorce, received a settlement offer worth $11 million, and been offered a position in the governor's cabinet. Namanar, you have been busy." I've been preparing for this for months. I just executed the plan. Your father would be proud. He always said you have the best mind in the family. My father had died 5 years ago, never knowing that Julian had been slowly dismissing and undermining me. But he'd known I was capable of extraordinary things. Had encouraged my education, supported my career, believed in my potential even when I doubted myself. I wish he could see this, I said. He can. And he's smiling. Thursday morning, Julian's lawyer called Naomi with a revised settlement offer. They'd accepted our terms, no NDA requiring complete silence, just an agreement not to actively seek media attention about the divorce. The asset division remained the same. Do you want to accept? Naomi asked. Yes. Let's finalize this and move forward. I'll draw up the final documents. You'll need to sign them. He'll sign them. And the divorce will be final in 60 days per state law. Perfect. That afternoon, I taught my classes and met with Harold Yates about the transition timeline for the education initiative. The board wants you to remain teaching at least part-time, Harold explained. They think it's important that the architect of the program stays connected to the classroom. I'd like that. But if the governor's office offers me the state director position, I may need to reduce my teaching load. The state director position? Victoria, that's incredible. When did Wednesday? They want me to oversee statewide implementation of the model. Harold sat back, clearly impressed. From my high school English teacher to state director of academic excellence in 3 days. That's quite a trajectory. I was always capable of this. People just weren't paying attention. Julian wasn't paying attention. No, he wasn't. But the rest of the world is now. Friday afternoon, I met with Governor Helena Morrison at the state capitol. She was a woman in her mid-50s, pragmatic and direct, with a reputation for results-driven leadership. Dr. Chen Harrington, I've reviewed your work, she said after we'd settled into her office. It's exactly what this state needs. Education reform that's actually based on educational expertise rather than political ideology or corporate profit motives. Thank you, Governor. That's been my goal, to center students and learning rather than test scores and data extraction. I want you as my state director of academic excellence. I want you to take this model statewide. I want you to transform education in this state the same way you're transforming your district. Are you ready for that? Was I ready to become one of the most influential education policymakers in the state? To reshape systems that affected millions of students? To prove that just a teacher could change the world? Yes, Governor, I'm ready. We spent 2 hours discussing logistics, timelines, political realities. By the time I left, we'd agreed on a start date, August 1st, giving me time to finish the school year and transition the district's program implementation to new leadership. As I drove home Friday evening, I thought about the past week. 7 days ago, I'd sat in a banquet hall listening to my husband dismiss my career. Now, I was divorced, financially secure, and about to become one of the most powerful education voices in the state. Julian had called me just a teacher. The world was learning that there's no such thing as just a teacher. Not when teachers are capable of this. Number 6. The weekend brought a flood of media requests. Reporters wanted interviews about the education initiative, about the school renaming, about what it meant to be a teacher doing policy work at this level. I declined most of them. I'd said what needed to be said at the press conference. But I did agree to one interview with the state's largest newspaper, scheduled for Monday afternoon. Saturday morning, I met with the movers at Julian's house. I still thought of it as his house, not ours. He'd agreed to be absent during the move, though I could feel his presence in the sharp angles and cold surfaces, in the careful design that prioritized aesthetics over warmth. The movers packed my books, my clothes, my personal items. 12 years of marriage fit into a moving truck with room to spare. I'd never fully moved into this house, I realized. Had never claimed space the way Julian had always felt like a guest in someone else's home. Is there anything else, ma'am? The moving supervisor asked. I looked around the bedroom one last time. The emerald dress from the banquet hung in the closet. I left it there. Let Julian remember what he'd lost every time he saw it. That's everything, I said. My phone rang as the movers drove away. Julian, I answered. First time I'd taken his call since Monday night. Victoria, he said. and his voice sounded hollow. "Please, can we talk? In person?" "There's nothing to talk about, Julian. The lawyers are handling everything. Not about the divorce. About us. About what we had. What we had was built on your terms. Your house, your career, your priorities. I accommodated all of it, and you still weren't satisfied. You still wanted more recognition, more status, more excitement. So you found Sloan, and you planned to leave me with nothing. I made mistakes. But Victoria, I love you. I always have. No, you didn't. You loved having a wife who didn't challenge you, who made you look good at parties, who managed your household while you focused on your career. You didn't love me, you loved the idea of me. That's not Julian. I need you to understand something. This isn't about anger or revenge. This is about finally recognizing my own worth. You spent 12 years showing me I wasn't valuable enough for your respect. And I finally believed you, but not in the way you intended. I believe that someone who can't see my value doesn't deserve my presence." Silence. Then, the school. The Chen Harrington Academy. "You used my name. It's my name too. I've been Dr. Chen Harrington for 12 years. Did you think I'd given up my identity when we married? I don't know what I thought. I never thought about it, I guess. That's the problem, Julian. You never thought about it. About me. About what I was building while you were busy building your empire. And now everyone knows my name. But not because I'm your wife. Because I'm Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington, education policy expert and State Director of Academic Excellence. State Director? What Governor Morrison offered me the position. Friday. I accepted. I start in August." Another long silence. Then, "You're going to be famous. More famous than me. I'm going to be influential. There's a difference. I don't need awards and media attention. I need to change systems, help students, transform education. That's what matters. God, Victoria, I really didn't know you at all, did I? No, Julian, you didn't. But that's because you never asked." I hung up, blocked his number, stood in the driveway of the house I was leaving, and felt the last emotional connection to my marriage dissolve. Sunday, I spent the day organizing my new apartment. Angela came over to help, and we turned the empty space into something that felt like home. Books on the shelves, art on the walls, furniture arranged for comfort rather than aesthetic perfection. "It's so much warmer than Julian's place," Angela observed, hanging a painting I'd bought at a local artist's studio. "This actually feels like you, because it is me. I chose everything here. Not what looked good for entertaining investors, but what made me happy." Are you happy? Really happy? Or are you just relieved to be out? Both. I'm relieved the pretending is over, but I'm also genuinely excited about what's next. The state director position, the education initiative, rebuilding my life on my own terms. Julian wanted me small and manageable. I'm finally allowing myself to be as big as I'm capable of being. Monday afternoon, I met the reporter from the state's largest newspaper at a coffee shop near the university. She was a woman in her 40s named Patricia, who'd been covering education policy for 20 years. "Dr. Chen Harrington, thank you for agreeing to this interview," Patricia said after we'd settled with our coffee. "The education initiative has been the talk of the state. I'd like to understand how you developed this model and what you hope to achieve." We talked for 90 minutes. I explained the research foundation, the years of curriculum development, the careful construction of a model that balanced high expectations with comprehensive support. Patricia took notes, asked thoughtful questions, demonstrated genuine understanding of education policy. Then, near the end of the interview, she asked, "Your husband, Julian Harrington, referred to you as just a teacher at an award ceremony last week. Did that comment influence your decision to make this announcement when you did?" I'd known this question would come, had prepared my answer carefully. "That comment reflected a broader cultural misunderstanding about teaching," I said. "Teaching isn't a fallback career or something people do when they can't succeed in the real world. Teaching is intellectual work, designing curriculum, assessing learning, adapting instruction to meet diverse needs. It requires advanced degrees, ongoing professional development, and expertise in both subject matter and pedagogy. My husband's comment wasn't about me personally. It was about how our society devalues education and the professionals who dedicate their lives to it. But it must have hurt, personally. It clarified something I'd been unwilling to see, that my husband didn't value my work. And if someone who's supposed to love you can't recognize your value, why would you stay in that relationship? Patricia's eyes widened slightly. Are you saying I filed for divorce Tuesday morning? The settlement was finalized Thursday. By the time this article publishes, it will be public record. May I ask, was there a specific reason for the divorce beyond the comment? The comment was a symptom, not the cause. The cause was 12 years of my work being dismissed, my expertise being ignored, my accomplishments being treated as hobbies. I stayed as long as I did because I believed in our marriage. But belief only works when both people are committed to seeing each other clearly. And he didn't see you clearly? He saw who he wanted me to be supportive, accommodating, content to be Mrs. Julian Harrington. He never saw who I actually am. Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington, someone capable of transforming education policy at the state level. The article ran Wednesday morning, front page, titled From Just a Teacher to State Director, Dr. Chen Harrington's Journey from Dismissal to Triumph. It was comprehensive, thoughtful, and devastating in its clarity. Patricia had interviewed former students, colleagues, education policy experts. Everyone praised my work, my vision, my expertise. And she'd woven Julian's just a teacher comment throughout the piece, letting it serve as a stark counterpoint to the actual scope of my accomplishments. The article went viral. By noon, it was being shared across social media, discussed on talk radio, referenced by education bloggers. My name was trending again, but this time the narrative was different. Not just teacher does impressive work, but woman transcends husband's dismissal to achieve extraordinary success. That afternoon, I received a call from Julian's business partner, a man named Vincent Cho. Dr. Chen Harrington, I'm calling to apologize. On behalf of everyone at the company. We never knew. It's fine, Vincent. You didn't dismiss my work. Julian did. But we enabled it. We laughed at his jokes. We treated you like you were just there to look good at company events. And we should have known better. Should have asked what you actually did. Most people don't ask. They assume teacher equals simple, uncomplicated, not requiring much intellectual capacity. That's the problem I'm trying to solve, not just for me, but for every teacher who's been dismissed this way. You're succeeding. The article today, the education initiative, the state director position, you're changing how people think about teaching. That's the goal. Thursday morning, I received an unexpected email from Sloan Pierce. Subject line: I'm sorry. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. Dr. Chen Harrington, I owe you an apology. Not just for the affair, though, that was wrong and I take responsibility, but for the way I thought about you. I bought into Julian's narrative that you were just a teacher, just a wife, just someone who didn't matter much beyond looking good at events. I was wrong. Spectacularly, humiliatingly wrong. Watching the past 2 weeks unfold, seeing what you've actually accomplished, understanding the scope of your work, it's made me realize how small-minded I was, how small-minded Julian made me. He convinced both of us that what you did didn't matter, that you were less than, and we believed him because it was convenient. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see it now, how wrong I was, how wrong we both were, and I hope that wherever you go from here, you never again let anyone make you small. Sloan, I read the email 3 times, trying to decide how I felt about it. Angry, satisfied, indifferent. Eventually, I settled on something like pity. Sloan had been complicit in Julian's dismissal of me, yes. But she'd also been a victim of his worldview, the idea that only certain types of work mattered, only certain accomplishments deserved recognition. I didn't respond to the email, but I didn't delete it either. Saved it in a folder marked documentation, not because I'd need it legally, but because it represented something important, acknowledgement that Julian's perspective had been wrong. Friday afternoon, the school held an assembly. Harold Yates had insisted on recognizing my work formally, in front of students and faculty. "Today, we celebrate one of our own," Harold said from the auditorium stage. "Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington has taught English at this school for 6 years. In that time, she's developed curriculum frameworks that have been adopted statewide. She's written policy papers that have influenced legislation. And most recently, she secured a $50 million grant to transform education across 20 schools in our district." The students and faculty applauded. Some students were standing, cheering. I saw Keisha, my student who'd asked if this was because of me, holding up a sign that said, "Miss H is the real MVP." In recognition of her extraordinary contributions, Harold continued, "This school will officially become the Chen Harrington Academy for Academic Excellence. And Dr. Chen Harrington herself will serve as our first distinguished faculty fellow, maintaining a part-time teaching position while serving as the state's Director of Academic Excellence." More applause. Harold called me to the stage. I stood in front of 200 students and 50 faculty members and felt something I'd never felt at Julian's award ceremonies. Genuinely recognized. Not as someone's wife or someone's accessory, but as myself. For my actual work. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. "This school has been my home for 6 years. These students have been my inspiration. Everything I've accomplished, the curriculum frameworks, the policy papers, the education initiative, it all started here, in classrooms with students who taught me as much as I taught them. I'm honored to have this school bear my name, but I want to be clear, this isn't about me. It's about the work. And the work belongs to all of us." After the assembly, students lined up to talk to me, to thank me, to tell me what my class had meant to them. Several asked if I'd still be teaching next year. "Part-time," I promised. "I'll be here. This is where I belong." That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the week's events. The article, Sloane's apology, the school assembly, the overwhelming public support for both the education initiative and my decision to leave Julian. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Dr. Chen Harrington?" "This is Theodore Hamilton from the Hamilton Education Foundation. The foundation that had awarded the $50 million grant." I sat up straighter. "Mr. Hamilton, thank you for calling. I'm calling to congratulate you on the past week's events. The media coverage, the public response, it's exactly what we hoped for when we funded your initiative. You're changing the narrative around education. That's been the goal. I'm also calling to discuss the future. The foundation has been approached by several other states interested in replicating your model. Would you be interested in serving as a national consultant, helping other states implement similar reforms?" National consultant. My model going beyond one state, potentially reshaping education across the country. "Yes," I said. "I'd be very interested." "Excellent. I'll have my team reach out with details. Dr. Chen Harrington, you're doing extraordinary work. Don't let anyone ever tell you it's just teaching." After we hung up, I sat looking out my apartment window at the tree-lined street. 2 weeks ago, I'd been Mrs. Julian Harrington, just a teacher, living in someone else's house and accepting someone else's definition of my worth. Now, I was Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington, State Director of Academic Excellence, architect of a $50 million education initiative, potential national consultant, with my name on a school and my model being discussed across the country. Julian had tried to make me small, had dismissed my work, dismissed my expertise, dismissed the value of teaching itself. And I'd responded not by arguing with him, not by demanding recognition, but by doing the work, building something so substantial, so transformative, so undeniably important that the whole world had to recognize it. That was the best revenge. Not hurting him back, but succeeding so thoroughly that his dismissal became irrelevant, becoming so accomplished that his opinion didn't matter anymore. The school bore my name. The state had given me authority. The nation was watching. And Julian? Julian was learning that just a teacher was the most dangerous thing he'd ever said. Summer arrived, and with it came the transition period. I finished the school year, my last as a full-time classroom teacher, and prepared for my new role as state director. The final weeks of school were bittersweet. I loved teaching, loved the daily interaction with students, loved watching them grow and develop over a school year. But I also knew that moving into policy work would allow me to impact far more students across far more schools. "You're going to change everything," Angela said during our last teacher workday. We were cleaning out our classrooms. I was boxing up 12 years of curriculum materials, student work, books I'd purchased with my own money because school budgets were never sufficient. That's the plan. "But I'm going to miss this. Miss being in the classroom every day. You'll still teach part-time in the fall. And honestly, Victoria, what you're doing at the state level is going to help every teacher in the state. You're making it possible for all of us to do our jobs better." June brought the official school renaming ceremony. The district held it on a Saturday morning, a formal event with the board, the superintendent, community leaders, and current and former students. They'd installed a new sign at the school entrance, Chen Harrington Academy for Academic Excellence. My name, in bronze letters. On a building where I'd spent 6 years teaching, developing, creating. A building that would now serve as the model for 19 other schools across the district. My mother attended the ceremony, crying quietly in the front row. "Your father would have been so proud," she whispered when I sat beside her before the program started. "I know. I wish he could have seen this." "He did see it. He always knew you were capable of extraordinary things. He told me once, 'May, our daughter is going to change the world. We just need to give her time to figure out how.'" The ceremony was beautiful. Students performed, faculty spoke. Harold Yates gave a speech about the importance of recognizing educational excellence. Then he called me to the podium. "Dr. Chen Harrington has asked to say a few words," Harold announced. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of 200 people. Students, teachers, community members, district administrators. People who understood that education mattered, that teaching mattered, that what happened in classrooms shaped the future. 6 years ago, I walked into this building as a new teacher, I began. I was nervous, uncertain, hoping I was good enough to make a difference. Now, 6 years later, this building bears my name. Not because I was perfect, I made plenty of mistakes along the way, but because I was committed. Committed to students. Committed to excellence. Committed to the idea that every child deserves a teacher who believes in their potential. I paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Some students I'd taught, some colleagues I'd worked with, some strangers who'd just come to see the ceremony. This school's new name isn't about celebrating me. It's about celebrating what's possible when we commit to educational excellence. When we refuse to accept that some students can't learn, some schools can't improve, some communities can't succeed. This academy will be a place where we expect greatness and provide the support necessary to achieve it. And that model, that commitment to excellence, paired with comprehensive support, that's what will spread to 20 schools across our district. That's what will, hopefully, spread across our state and perhaps beyond. I took a breath, steadying myself for what came next. Some of you may know that this year has been transformative for me professionally and personally. I've been given extraordinary opportunities, the education initiative, the state director position, the chance to influence policy at a level I never imagined. But I've also ended my marriage. And I want to address that directly, because the two things are connected. The crowd went completely silent. I saw Harold's eyes widen slightly. We hadn't discussed me mentioning the divorce. My former husband once referred to me as just a teacher. He didn't mean it cruelly, I don't think. He simply didn't understand what teaching actually involves, the expertise, the commitment, the intellectual rigor. And that misunderstanding, that dismissal of my work, ultimately ended our marriage. Not because I was angry, but because I realized that I'd been making myself smaller to fit his understanding of what my career should be. And I was done being small. I saw some people nodding, saw some teachers with tears in their eyes. This school bears my name now. The education initiative bears my name. Soon, the state director position will bear my name. And all of that happened not because I left my marriage, but because I finally stopped accepting other people's limited definitions of what I was capable of achieving. Teaching isn't small work. It's not simple. It's not something people do when they can't succeed in real careers. Teaching is the work of shaping minds, transforming lives, building futures. And I'm honored to have spent 12 years doing it. I'm honored to have this school bear my name, and I'm honored to continue serving education, even as my role evolves. I stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. Some people were standing. My mother was crying openly now. Angela was beaming. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached me. Former students wanting to share how my class had impacted them. Teachers thanking me for speaking openly about the divorce. Parents expressing gratitude for the education initiative. One woman in her 40s, who I didn't recognize, waited until the crowd had thinned. Dr. Chen Harrington? My name is Paula Winters. I'm a science teacher at Lincoln Middle School. I just wanted to thank you for what you said, about not being small, about refusing to accept limited definitions of what we're capable of. I've been in a similar situation, a husband who dismisses my work, who treats teaching like a hobby. And hearing you speak today, hearing that you chose yourself over making him comfortable, it's given me courage to do the same. I'm glad. You deserve a partner who sees your value, who recognizes that what we do matters. He told me last week that if I was really smart, I'd go to graduate school and get a real job. As if 12 years of teaching isn't a real job. It's the realest job there is. And you don't need anyone's permission to recognize that. Not his, not anyone's. Paula nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away. Angela, who'd overheard the conversation, put her arm around my shoulders. You're gonna inspire a lot of teachers to leave bad relationships, you know. If they're in relationships where their partners don't value them, good. Life's too short to accept dismissal from people who are supposed to love you. July was consumed by preparation for the state director role. I met with district superintendents across the state, reviewed existing education policies, began building a team of advisors and specialists who would help implement the Academic Excellence Initiative statewide. The governor's office provided me with an operating budget of $2 million annually, not nearly enough to transform education, but enough to leverage existing resources and create meaningful change. I hired Angela as my deputy director. She'd been wanting to move into administration, and I needed someone I trusted absolutely. We're going to do this together, I told her when I offered her the position. Just like we've done everything since we met in grad school 15 years ago. Together. Always. Now, let's go change education in this state. August 1st, my official start date as state director, brought a swearing-in ceremony at the state capitol. Governor Morrison administered the oath while my mother, Angela, and 24 education leaders watched. Do you solemnly swear to faithfully execute the duties of State Director of Academic Excellence, and to the best of your ability support education across this state? I do. Then, by the power vested in me as governor, I hereby appoint you State Director of Academic Excellence for this state. Congratulations, Dr. Chen Harrington. We shook hands, posed for photographs, and then I went to work. My office was in the state education department, building a corner office with windows overlooking the Capitol grounds. I'd had a nameplate made, Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington, State Director of Academic Excellence, not Mrs. Julian Harrington. Not just a teacher, but my full name, my full title, my full recognition. The first 6 months as state director were intense. I traveled to school districts across the state, met with teachers and administrators, evaluated existing programs, identified needs and resources. Angela and I worked 70-hour weeks, building systems that would support education transformation statewide. The education initiative in my home district was thriving. The 20 schools implementing my model were seeing measurable improvements, higher test scores, yes. But more importantly, higher student engagement, lower dropout rates, more students pursuing advanced coursework. By December, 3 additional districts had requested to implement the model. By March of the following year, it was 8 districts. By June, we'd secured state funding to expand the initiative to 50 schools across 15 districts. You're building an empire, Angela said one evening as we reviewed expansion plans in my office. An education empire. Not an empire. A system. One that prioritizes students over profits, teachers over data, learning over test scores. Still, Julian built a company. You're building something that will last generations. Julian. I thought about him sometimes, though less and less as time passed. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that his business was struggling. That investors had started questioning his leadership. that Sloan had left the company and started her own consulting firm. I felt no satisfaction in his struggles. Just a mild acknowledgement that karma worked in mysterious ways. A year after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter from Julian. Actual paper letter mailed to my office. Victoria, I know I have no right to contact you. That you've moved on, built an extraordinary career, become exactly the person you were always meant to be. But I needed to write this. I was wrong. About everything. About teaching. About you. About what mattered. I spent our entire marriage building a company, chasing recognition, trying to matter. And in doing so, I completely failed to recognize that I was married to someone who actually did matter, who was doing work that would outlast anything I could build. I read articles about your work now, about the schools implementing your model, about the state initiative, about the potential for national expansion. And I realized that I knew you for 12 years and never really saw you, never understood who you were or what you were capable of. This isn't an attempt to get you back. I know that's impossible. And honestly, you deserve better than I could ever be. This is just an apology. A real one. I'm sorry I dismissed your work. I'm sorry I called you just a teacher. I'm sorry I was too blind to recognize that I was married to someone extraordinary. I hope you're happy. I hope you found someone who actually sees you. And I hope you know that what you're building is remarkable. Julian, I read the letter twice, felt nothing, and filed it away. Apologies were nice, but they didn't change the past. Julian had spent 12 years showing me who he was. I'd finally believed him, and I'd chosen to build a life without him. That life was better, richer, more meaningful, more authentically mine. 2 years after the divorce, I was invited to speak at a national education conference in Washington, D.C. The keynote address for 3,000 educators from across the country. The topic, Transforming Education Through Teacher-Led Policy Innovation. I stood on the stage, looking out at an audience of teachers, administrators, policymakers, people who dedicated their lives to education, people who understood what it meant to be called just a teacher and to know that teaching was anything but simple. 2 years ago, I began. Someone I loved looked at me and said I was just a teacher, as if teaching was simple, as if it required no expertise, as if anyone could do it without training, without skill, without genuine intellectual capacity. I paused, letting that statement sink in. That comment ended my marriage. Not because it made me angry, though it did, but because it made me realize I'd been accepting less than I deserved. Less respect, less recognition, less understanding of what my work actually involved. And I decided I was done accepting less. I clicked to the next slide, which showed the Chen Harrington Academy. This school bears my name now. Not because I demanded recognition, but because I built something worth recognizing. A comprehensive education model that's now being implemented in 80 schools across 15 districts in my state. A model that's being evaluated for national expansion. A model that started in my classroom because I believe students and teachers deserved better than what we were giving them. Another slide, showing data on student outcomes. The results speak for themselves. Higher achievement, higher engagement, lower dropout rates. But more than that, students who believe in their own potential, teachers who feel supported and valued, communities that see schools as assets rather than failures. I looked directly at the audience. Some of you have been told you're just teachers, that your work is simple, your expertise is limited, your impact is small. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. Teaching is the most complex work there is. It requires subject matter expertise, pedagogical knowledge, psychological understanding, cultural competency, assessment literacy, curriculum development skills, and the ability to adapt all of that in real time to meet diverse student needs. That's not simple work. That's extraordinarily sophisticated professional practice. The audience erupted in applause. Some teachers were standing. And here's what I've learned in the past 2 years. When we stop accepting other people's limited definitions of our work, when we stop being small to make others comfortable, when we claim the recognition we've earned, that's when we change systems. That's when we transform education. Not by asking permission, but by doing the work and refusing to diminish its importance. More applause. The speech continued for 40 minutes, and by the end, people were on their feet. After the keynote, dozens of people wanted to talk to me. Teachers sharing their own stories of dismissal. Administrators asking about implementing my model. Policymakers discussing potential state-level adoption. One woman, probably in her 60s, waited until everyone else had left. Dr. Chen Harrington, I taught for 40 years, retired 5 years ago. And I spent those 40 years having people, including my own husband, treat my career like it was a hobby, like it was something I did to fill time until I had children. I never had children, by the way. Teaching was my choice, my calling, and it was never valued. I'm sorry. You deserved better. But hearing you speak today, seeing what you've built, watching you claim recognition, it validates those 40 years. It tells me that I was right, that teaching did matter, that I mattered. You absolutely mattered. Every student you taught, every life you touched, that was real impact. That was important work. She hugged me, crying, and walked away. Angela, who'd witnessed the interaction, shook her head. You're not just changing education policy, you're healing people, giving them permission to value themselves. If I can do that while also transforming school systems, that's even better. 3 years after the divorce, I met someone. His name was Dr. Marcus Kim, a fellow education policy expert who'd been brought in to evaluate state education initiatives. He was Korean American, 42, divorced with 2 teenage daughters. We met at a policy conference and spent 6 hours talking about curriculum design, assessment theory, and the best ways to support struggling schools. You're Dr. Chen Harrington, he said when we first introduced ourselves. I've been following your work for 2 years. The academic excellence model is brilliant. I'm evaluating it for potential adoption in my state. Which state? California. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction. We're looking at statewide implementation if the model proves as effective as the initial data suggests. We had dinner that night, then breakfast the next morning. By the end of the conference, we'd exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. He called 2 days later. I know this is fast, but would you want to have dinner when I'm in town next week? I'll be visiting some of your implementation schools. I'd like that. Marcus was different from Julian in every way that mattered. He asked questions about my work, genuinely listened to the answers, understood the complexities of education policy. He valued expertise, respected intellectual work, and never once suggested that teaching was simple or unimportant. My ex-wife was a teacher, he told me during our 3rd date, elementary school. I spent 10 years watching her pour her heart into her work, then come home and grade papers until midnight. Teaching isn't a job, it's a calling. Anyone who doesn't understand that doesn't understand education. 6 months later, Marcus accepted a position as superintendent of a large urban district in my state. He moved from California, brought his daughters, bought a house near mine. We took things slowly, both of us were cautious after failed marriages, but it felt different, real, built on mutual respect and shared values. A year into our relationship, we attended an education conference together. At the dinner reception, someone introduced me as Dr. Chen Harrington, the state director, Marcus added, and the architect of the most successful education reform model in the country. Not Marcus Kim's girlfriend. Not defined by my relationship, but recognized for my actual accomplishments. That night, back at the hotel, Marcus asked, "Does it bother you when people know we're together? Do you worry they'll see you differently?" With Julian, yes. I was always Julian's wife first and Victoria second. But with you, people already know who I am, know what I've accomplished. Our relationship doesn't diminish that, it's just an addition to who I am, not a replacement for it. Good. Because I never want you to feel small again. You're extraordinary, Victoria, and I want everyone to know it. 4 years after the divorce, the national evaluation results came back. The academic excellence model had been rigorously tested across 100 schools in 20 states. The outcomes were undeniable. Significant improvements in student achievement, teacher satisfaction, community engagement, and long-term educational outcomes. The U.S. Department of Education invited me to Washington to discuss national adoption. Dr. Chen Harrington, the Secretary of Education, said, "Your model is exactly what this nation needs. Evidence-based, teacher-driven. focused on actual learning rather than corporate profit. We'd like to offer you a position as Senior Advisor for Education Innovation. You'd help us implement this model nationally. National adoption. My classroom-developed model becoming the framework for education transformation across the entire country. I'm honored, I said. But I need to maintain my state position. The work there isn't finished. We can arrange a hybrid role. Part-time in Washington, part-time in your state. Whatever it takes to have your expertise shaping national policy. I accepted. Starting in August, 5 years after becoming state director, I'd split my time between my state and DC, helping shape education policy at the highest level. Marcus was thrilled. You're going to transform education nationally. Do you realize what this means? It means Julian's comment about me being just a teacher is going to age worse and worse. It already aged terribly. Now it's going to become legendary the moment a fool dismissed someone who went on to reshape education across an entire country. 5 years after the divorce, I received an invitation to Julian's wedding. He was marrying a woman named Amanda, someone I didn't know. The invitation was simple, elegant, and I almost threw it away. But something made me curious. I looked up Amanda online and found that she was a doctor, a pediatrician with her own practice. Accomplished, independent, clearly someone who wouldn't tolerate being dismissed or diminished. Julian learned his lesson, Angela said when I showed her the invitation. He's marrying someone who won't accept being small. Good for him. And good for her. I didn't attend the wedding, but I sent a donation to an education nonprofit in both their names. The card read, "Wishing you both a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. Victoria." It wasn't bitter. It wasn't vindictive. It was simply acknowledgement that Julian had moved on and so had I. That we'd both learned from our failed marriage and were building better lives. 6 years after the divorce, Marcus proposed. We were at my mother's house for Lunar New Year dinner when he got down on one knee. "Victoria, you're the most brilliant person I've ever met. You're changing education nationally. You're inspiring thousands of teachers. You're building something that will last generations. And I want to spend the rest of my life supporting that work, celebrating your achievements, and building something together that's built on genuine partnership. Will you marry me?" I said yes. Not because I needed to be married. I'd built a life I loved independently. Not because marriage would define me, my work already did that. But because Marcus saw me clearly, valued my work genuinely, and wanted a partnership based on equality rather than hierarchy. We married 6 months later. Small ceremony, close family and friends, vows we wrote ourselves. Mine included. I promised to never make myself small, to never accept dismissal, to build a partnership where both of us can be as large as we're capable of being. Marcus's included. I promised to see you clearly, to value your work as much as my own, to support your ambitions without ever trying to diminish them. 7 years after the divorce, the Chen Harrington model had been adopted in 42 states, 800 schools nationwide, 2 million students, thousands of teachers implementing the comprehensive framework I developed in my classroom years ago. Articles were written about me, documentaries filmed, awards given. But the most meaningful recognition came from teachers, emails, and letters telling me that my work had validated theirs, had given them language to describe the complexity of teaching, had helped them claim the respect they deserved. One letter, from a teacher in Texas, said, "I showed my husband the video of your keynote speech. The one where you talk about being called just a teacher." He cried and apologized. Said he'd never understood what my work actually involved until he heard you explain it. "Thank you for giving me the words to make him see." That was the real impact. Not the schools implementing my model, though that mattered. Not the national recognition, though that helped. But the individual teachers who felt seen, valued, recognized because I'd refused to accept dismissal. 10 years after the divorce, I stood in the original Chen Harrington Academy for the anniversary celebration of the school renaming. The building had been renovated, expanded, turned into a true showcase of educational excellence. Student achievement was high. Teacher satisfaction was high. The school had a waiting list of families wanting to enroll. Harold Yates, now retired but still involved in district affairs, gave a speech about the transformation. 10 years ago, we renamed this school. Some people thought it was premature. Dr. Chen Harrington was just a classroom teacher then, they said. But the board saw what she was building, saw her potential. And look at what's happened since. A state initiative, a national model, education transformation that's touched millions of students. This school bears her name not just because of what she accomplished, but because of what she represents. The power of teacher expertise to reshape systems. I was asked to speak. I stood at the podium, the same podium where I'd spoken at the original renaming ceremony, and looked out at the crowd. 10 years ago, my husband called me just a teacher. That comment set in motion everything that came after. Not because it made me angry, but because it made me realize I was capable of more than I'd been accepting. More respect, more recognition, more influence, and I decided to claim it. I paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Teachers, students, parents, community members. This school bears my name. Hundreds of schools across the country implement my model. I advise the Secretary of Education on national policy. I've written books, given keynotes, influenced legislation, and all of it, every single bit, started in a classroom. Started with believing that teaching mattered, that students deserved excellence, that educators deserved respect. Another pause. Then, Julian was wrong. Teaching isn't small work. It's not simple. It's not just anything. Teaching is the work of shaping the future one student at a time, and I'm honored to have spent my career proving that. Honored to have this school bear my name. Honored to have built something that will outlast me, outlast all of us, because it's built on the fundamental belief that education can transform lives. The applause was thunderous. Some people were standing. I saw teachers crying, students cheering, parents nodding. After the ceremony, a young woman in her 20s approached me. Dr. Chen Harrington? I was one of your students. 11 years ago. You taught me sophomore English. I remember. You wrote a brilliant paper on the Great Gatsby. You remembered that? I remember all my students. You're part of why I do this work. I wanted you to know, I'm a teacher now. Elementary school. And when people ask me why I chose teaching, I tell them about you. About how you showed me that teaching isn't a fallback career. It's a calling. And you've proved it by changing education nationally while still claiming the identity of teacher. What's your name? So I can add you to my list of teacher descendants, Maya Santos, and Dr. Chen Harrington. Thank you for everything, for showing me, showing all of us that teaching matters. That evening, Marcus and I had dinner at my mother's house. She'd made traditional Taiwanese dishes, braised pork belly, stir-fried vegetables, soup dumplings. We ate and talked about the anniversary celebration, about the students who'd become teachers, about the continuing expansion of the education model. Your father would be so proud, my mother said for the 100th time. Not just of what you've accomplished, but of how you've done it. With integrity, with humility, with genuine care for students and teachers. I learned from the best. You and Dad taught me that success means nothing if it's not built on genuine values. And have you heard from Julian recently? Christmas card every year. He and Amanda have 2 children now. He seems happy, or at least content. Do you ever regret it? The divorce? Never. Not for a single moment. That marriage was built on a foundation of dismissal. This life, the work, Marcus, the impact I'm having, this is built on recognition, on genuine partnership, on refusing to be small. Marcus raised his glass. To refusing to be small. We toasted. To refusing to be small. To building something that mattered. To transforming education, one school at a time. To proving that just a teacher was the most powerful thing anyone could be. 15 years after the divorce, I was invited to give a TED Talk. The title, There's No Such Thing as Just a Teacher. I stood on the familiar red circle, looking out at the audience in the theater and the cameras that would broadcast this to millions of viewers online. 15 years ago, I began. My then husband stood in front of 200 people and introduced me as just a teacher. Just. As if teaching was simple. As if it required no expertise. As if anyone could do it without training or skill or genuine intellectual capacity. I let that hang in the air. That comment ended my marriage. But more importantly, it launched a journey that's transformed education for millions of students across this country. Because I decided that day that I was done accepting dismissal, done being small, done letting anyone define my work as less than it actually was. I clicked to a slide showing the Chen Harrington Academy. This school bears my name. Not because I demanded recognition, but because I built a comprehensive education model that's now implemented in 42 states, 800 schools, impacting 2 million students annually. A model that started in my 10th grade English classroom because I believed students deserved better and teachers deserved respect. Another slide, showing student achievement data. The results are clear. When we treat teaching as the sophisticated professional practice, it actually is when we value teacher expertise, provide comprehensive support, and center student learning over test scores, students thrive. Teachers thrive. Communities thrive. I look directly at the camera. So here's what I want you to understand. Teaching is the most complex work there is. It requires subject matter expertise, pedagogical knowledge, psychological understanding, cultural competency, assessment literacy, curriculum development skills, and the ability to adapt all of that in real time to meet diverse student needs. That's not simple. That's extraordinarily sophisticated professional practice. I paused for emphasis. And yet, we persistently devalue teaching. We pay teachers poorly. We give them inadequate support. We treat them as implementers of other people's ideas rather than as the experts they are. And then we wonder why education struggles. Another slide, showing teacher attrition rates. Half of new teachers leave the profession within 5 years. Not because teaching is too hard, though it is hard, but because they're not valued. Because they're treated as just teachers rather than as the professionals they are. And every teacher who leaves is a loss. A loss of expertise, of experience, of the kind of relationship building that transforms student lives. I clicked to a slide showing my own career trajectory. I've spent 27 years in education, 12 in the classroom, 15 in policy work. I'm now Senior Advisor for Education Innovation at the U.S. Department of Education. I've written 4 books. I've given keynotes in 23 countries. I advise governors and senators, and the Secretary of Education himself on education policy. Final slide. My professional headshot with the caption Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington, education policy expert and proud teacher. And I still introduce myself as a teacher. Not former teacher, not education expert who used to teach, just teacher. Because teaching isn't something you stop being. It's not a stepping stone to something more important. Teaching is the work. Everything else I do, the policy, the consulting, the advising, that's all in service of teaching. In service of classrooms. In service of the millions of teachers doing the real work every single day. I stepped forward, off the red circle slightly. So the next time someone introduces themselves as a teacher, don't say just a teacher. Don't ask when they're going to get a real job. Don't suggest they should go into administration or policy work if they're really smart. Instead, recognize that you're talking to someone doing the most important, most complex, most impactful work in our society. Recognize that teachers are the reason we have doctors and engineers and lawyers and every other profession. And recognize that maybe, just maybe, we should treat them accordingly. The talk ended. The audience stood. The applause was overwhelming. Afterward, dozens of people wanted to talk to me. Teachers thanking me for validating their work. Administrators asking about professional development. Policymakers discussing implementation strategies. One man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit, waited until everyone else had left. Dr. Chen Harrington? I'm Theodore Carlson. I'm CEO of a major education technology company. We've been trying to break into schools for years, but teachers keep resisting our products. After hearing your talk, I think I understand why. We've been treating teachers like they're obstacles to overcome, rather than experts to partner with. That's exactly right. Education technology is designed by people who've never taught. It prioritizes data extraction over student learning. Teachers resist because they recognize bad pedagogy when they see it. Would you be willing to consult with my company? Help us redesign our approach to actually serve teachers and students rather than just collecting data. only if you're genuinely committed to centering teaching and learning. I won't help you rebrand the same exploitative practices. I'm committed. Your talk made me realize we've been doing this wrong. I want to do it right. We exchanged information. I agreed to review their current products and provide recommendations, but only if they agreed to fundamental redesign based on actual pedagogical principles. The TED Talk was viewed 7 million times in the first month. It became one of the most watched education talks on the platform. Teachers shared it on social media. School districts used it in professional development. Education programs assigned it to preserve as teachers. And everywhere I went, people recognized me. Not as that teacher who got divorced, but as the education policy expert from the TED Talk. The woman who'd stood up and said teaching mattered. Who'd refused to accept dismissal. Who'd built a career on the fundamental principle that educators deserve respect. 18 years after the divorce, I published my memoir, More Than Just, A Teacher's Journey, From Dismissal to Transformation. It chronicled my marriage to Julian, the banquet hall comment, the divorce, and the subsequent 18 years of building the education model that had transformed schools nationwide. The book became a New York Times bestseller, not just among educators, though teachers bought it in droves, but among general readers who resonated with the story of refusing to accept dismissal, of claiming your own worth, of building something meaningful despite other people's limited vision. Oprah featured it in her book club. "This isn't just a book about teaching," she said during the announcement. "It's about refusing to be diminished by people who can't see your value. It's about claiming your own power. Every woman needs to read this." The book tour took me to 40 cities. At every event, people, mostly women, lined up to share their own stories. Stories of being dismissed by husbands, by bosses, by family members. Stories of finally refusing to be small. Stories of reclaiming their power and building lives that reflected their actual worth. "Your story gave me the courage to leave my marriage," one woman told me in Chicago. "My husband kept saying I should quit my teaching job and focus on his business. He needed me to answer phones," he said, "to make coffee for clients. Like I was his secretary, rather than a professional with my own career. I left. And now I'm the principal of my school. Good for you. You deserve a partner who values your work. I don't have a partner anymore, but I have my self-respect, and that's worth more than a bad marriage." At a book event in Austin, a young teacher in her 20s approached me crying. "I just finished my first year of teaching. It was the hardest year of my life. And my boyfriend kept asking when I was going to get a real job. Your book made me realize teaching is the real job. He's the one who doesn't understand. So I ended it, and I'm staying in teaching. Teaching needs you. Students need you. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." 20 years after the divorce, the Chen Harrington model had been adopted or adapted in all 50 states. It wasn't always implemented perfectly. Some states bastardized the model, used the name, but ignored the principles. But in the places where it was done right, the impact was undeniable. I was 62 years old, still working as senior advisor at the Department of Education, still teaching one graduate seminar per year at the university, still writing, speaking, consulting, still fighting for teachers and students. Marcus and I had been married 14 years. His daughters were adults now, successful in their own careers. We'd built a life together based on genuine partnership, supporting each other's work, celebrating each other's achievements, never diminishing each other to feel bigger. "You've changed education in this country," Marcus said one evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset. "Do you realize that? Millions of students have better education because you refuse to accept being called just a teacher." I didn't change anything alone. Thousands of teachers implementing the model, they're the ones doing the work. I just gave them a framework and fought for the resources to support it. You're being modest, I'm being accurate. This was never about me being exceptional. It was about recognizing that all teachers have the capacity for excellence if we value their expertise and provide support. I just happened to be in a position to prove it. 25 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected letter from Julian. "Victoria, I'm writing because I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me 3 to 6 months. I'm writing because I have things I need to say before it's too late. Things I should have said years ago. You were right. about everything. Teaching isn't simple work. It's not less important than business. And you weren't just a teacher, you were always extraordinary. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy looking at myself. I've spent the past 25 years watching your career from a distance, reading articles about the Chen Harrington model, seeing schools renamed, watching you transform education nationally, and realizing that I was married to someone remarkable and never recognized it. Amanda, my wife, she's a doctor. Brilliant, accomplished, someone who never let me dismiss her work. And she's been wonderful. We've built a good life, raised good kids, but she's not you. And I've spent 25 years knowing that I had something extraordinary and threw it away because I was too foolish to see it. This isn't an attempt to get closure or make amends. You don't owe me anything. I just needed you to know that I see it now. See what I missed. See who you were all along. I'm proud of what you've built. Proud that a school bears your name, our name, technically, though I had nothing to do with earning it. Proud that millions of students have better education because you refuse to accept my dismissal. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I'm sorry I wasted the years we had together by being blind to who you actually were. Thank you for being patient with me for as long as you were. Thank you for building something meaningful after you left. And thank you for proving that I was wrong about everything. Julian, I read the letter 3 times. Felt something that wasn't quite sadness, wasn't quite satisfaction. Just acknowledgement that Julian had finally, after 25 years, understood what he'd dismissed. I showed the letter to Marcus. Are you going to respond? He asked. I don't know. What would I say? Thank you for finally recognizing I was worth respecting? That seems inadequate. You could just acknowledge his apology. Let him have that closure before he dies. I thought about it for a week. Then I wrote back, Julian, I received your letter. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, and I'm sorry you're facing this diagnosis. You asked me once, years ago, if I regretted our marriage. I didn't then, and I don't now. That marriage taught me essential lessons about my own worth, about refusing to accept dismissal, about building a life based on my own values rather than someone else's vision. So no, I don't regret it. I regret that you spent 12 years of our marriage unable to see who I was. But I don't regret the marriage itself, because it ultimately led me here to work that matters, to a partnership built on genuine respect, to a life I'm proud of. I hope your remaining time is peaceful. I hope you're surrounded by people you love, who love you in return. And I hope you've learned to see clearly the people in your life now. Take care. Victoria Julian died 6 weeks later. I attended the funeral, sat in the back, didn't speak to anyone, left before the reception. Amanda saw me leaving and followed me out. Dr. Chen Harrington, I wanted to thank you for coming. I'm sorry for your loss. Julian talked about you a lot toward the end, about his regrets, about what he'd missed by not seeing you clearly. He saw me clearly enough at the end. That's something. He told me once that you were the most accomplished person he'd ever known, that building a company was nothing compared to transforming education nationally. He was proud of you. Is that strange to hear? A little, but I appreciate you telling me. He also said, and I think you should know this, he said that his biggest regret wasn't the divorce itself. It was that he'd wasted 12 years of your life, that you'd have accomplished even more if you hadn't been trying to make him comfortable. I thought about that. Had I wasted 12 years? Or had those years taught me necessary lessons? Maybe, I said finally. Or maybe I needed those 12 years to understand what I was capable of, to develop the steel I needed to fight for what mattered, to learn that accepting dismissal was worse than facing divorce. However you frame it, thank you. For being kind to him at the end, for acknowledging his apology. It gave him peace. After Amanda went back inside, I stood in the parking lot thinking about Julian, about our marriage, about the man who'd called me just a teacher and set in motion everything that came after. I didn't hate him, didn't love him either, just felt a distant acknowledgement that we'd been married once, that he'd taught me important lessons, mostly about what I wouldn't tolerate, and that we'd both moved on to build better lives. The funeral was the last time I thought about Julian as anything other than an abstract figure in my origin story. The man who dismissed me became just a footnote in the larger narrative of transformation. 30 years after the divorce, I was 72 years old and preparing to retire. Not from education, I'd never fully retire from that, but from active policy work. It was time to let younger voices lead, younger minds innovate, younger educators shape the future. My retirement was announced at the National Education Conference. 5,000 educators stood and applauded for 7 minutes straight. The Secretary of Education gave a speech about my impact, the Chen Harrington model. The schools transformed. The millions of students whose education had been improved because I'd refused to accept being just a teacher. Dr. Chen Harrington has spent 42 years in education, the Secretary said. 27 of those years in national policy work. She's shaped education reform across this entire country. She's inspired thousands of teachers to claim their expertise. She's proved that teacher-led innovation is the key to meaningful education transformation. And she's done all of it while maintaining her identity as a teacher, never forgetting where she came from, never losing sight of what matters. After the speech, I was given the National Education Association's highest honor, the Friend of Education Award, given annually to one person who's made transformational contributions to education. Previous recipients included presidents, philanthropists, education researchers. I was the first classroom teacher to receive it. This award doesn't belong to me alone, I said in my acceptance speech. It belongs to every teacher who's been told their work is simple, who's been dismissed as just a teacher, who's been undervalued, underpaid, and underrespected. This award is for all of us. And it's proof that teaching isn't small work. It's the most important work there is. In retirement, I wrote, consulted, mentored young educators, taught that one graduate seminar per year, spent time with Marcus, with family, with the teachers whose careers I'd helped launch. And occasionally, very occasionally, I thought about that banquet hall 30 years ago, about Julian standing at the podium saying, just a teacher, about the humiliation I'd felt, the decision I'd made, the journey that had followed. That one comment had changed everything. Not because it had broken me, but because it had forced me to recognize my own strength, to refuse dismissal, to build something so substantial, so transformative, so undeniably important that no one could ever dismiss it again. The school still bore my name. The education model was still being implemented. Teachers still cited my work. Students still benefited from the framework I'd developed. And somewhere, in some banquet hall, someone was probably being dismissed as just something, just a teacher, just a parent, just a support staff member, just something meant to minimize, to diminish, to suggest that their work didn't matter. I hoped they'd read my book, heard my TED Talk, learned that just was a lie, that their work did matter, that they were capable of extraordinary things if they refused to accept dismissal. Because that was the real lesson. Not that I was special, I wasn't, but that I'd refused to be small. And that refusal had changed everything. 35 years after the divorce, Marcus and I celebrated our 29th wedding anniversary. We'd built a life together based on everything my first marriage hadn't been: mutual respect, genuine partnership, unwavering support for each other's work. Do you ever think about him? Marcus asked over anniversary dinner. Julian? Not really. Sometimes I remember the story, the dismissal, the transformation, all of it. But Julian himself? He's just a character in that story now. Not a real person I knew, just a figure who said something that mattered. That's healthy. He's part of your past, but he doesn't define it. No. What defines my past is what I built after I left him. The work, the impact, the legacy. That's what matters. Do you regret anything? About your career, your choices? Any of it? I thought about that question. Did I regret anything? I regret that it took me so long to recognize my own worth, that I stayed in a marriage where I was dismissed for 12 years before finally leaving. But do I regret the work, the career, the impact I've had? Not for a second. You've changed millions of lives, literally millions. Students, teachers, entire communities. That's extraordinary. It was never about being extraordinary. It was about refusing to accept being treated as ordinary. About insisting that teaching mattered, that expertise mattered, that I mattered. And building a life that reflected that insistence. 40 years after the divorce, I was 82 years old, still sharp mentally, still engaged in education work, still writing and consulting and mentoring. Marcus and I had celebrated our 34th anniversary. My mother had passed away at 91. Proud until the end of the daughter who transformed education. The Chen Harrington Academy celebrated its 40th anniversary with a ceremony I attended virtually. COVID had taught us all to work remotely. The school had undergone another renovation. Student achievement was still high. Teachers still implemented my model. A new generation of students was benefiting from the framework I'd developed decades ago. The principal, a woman who'd been one of my students 40 years earlier, gave a speech. Dr. Chen Harrington taught me sophomore English in what is now this academy. She taught me to think critically, to analyze texts, to recognize manipulation when I saw it, but more importantly, she taught me by example that teaching is the most important work there is, that transforming education means respecting educators, that we are not just teachers, we are the architects of the future. I watched the ceremony from my home office, tears streaming down my face. This was legacy. Not awards or recognition or having my name on buildings, though those things mattered too. But this, students who'd become teachers, who were now teaching another generation, all of it built on the foundation of refusing to accept dismissal. Julian had been dead for 15 years. His company had been sold, his name mostly forgotten. The world had moved on without him. But my work continued, evolved, expanded, touched new generations of students and teachers. That was the difference between building a company and building a movement. Companies could be sold. Movements lived in people, in ideas, in the fundamental transformation of how we thought about work and value and respect. I'd built a movement, started with one comment in one banquet hall 40 years ago, built through years of classroom teaching, curriculum development, policy work, and national advocacy. Sustained by thousands of teachers who'd implemented the model, believed in the principles, and refused to accept dismissal themselves. That was revenge. Not hurting the person who'd wronged me, but building something so meaningful that the wrong became irrelevant. Creating such substantial good that the original harm was dwarfed by the transformation that followed. Julian had called me just a teacher. I'd proved that teaching could change the world. That was justice. 42 years after the divorce, on my 84th birthday, Marcus surprised me with a gift. A documentary film crew wanted to create a feature-length documentary about my life and work, about the transformation of education through the Chen Harrington model, about refusing to accept dismissal and building something extraordinary. They're calling it More Than Just, Marcus explained. Based on your memoir, it'll be released next year on the 45th anniversary of the school renaming. I'm 84 years old. Is anyone going to care about a documentary about an old teacher? You're not just an old teacher. You're the architect of the most significant education reform in modern American history. People care, teachers care, students care. The documentary will remind them why this work matters. I agreed to participate. Spent 6 months being interviewed, visiting schools, talking with teachers and students and policymakers. The film crew captured footage of me teaching my graduate seminar at 84. I was still teaching that one class per year. They interviewed former students, now teachers and principals and superintendents themselves. They documented the scope of the transformation, and they included the banquet hall footage. Someone had recorded Julian's speech 45 years ago, and they'd obtained the rights to use it in the documentary. So the film opened with Julian at the podium, saying those words, "When people ask what my wife does, I have to tell them she's just a teacher." The camera cut to present-day me, 84 years old but still sharp, still passionate about education. "That comment changed my life," I said to the camera. Not because it hurt me, though it did, but because it forced me to recognize that I'd been accepting less than I deserved, and I decided I was done accepting less. The documentary traced my journey. The divorce, the education initiative, the state director position, the national policy work, the transformation of schools across the country. It showed students whose lives had been changed, teachers whose expertise had been validated, communities that had been transformed. The film ended with footage from the Chen Harrington Academy's 45th anniversary ceremony. Students performing, teachers speaking, the community celebrating, and my voice over the images. Teaching isn't small work. It's not simple. And it's not something anyone can do without training and expertise and genuine intellectual capacity. Teaching is the work of shaping the future, and I've spent my life proving that. Proving that just a teacher is the most powerful thing anyone can be. The documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and won the Audience Award. It was picked up by a major streaming platform and viewed by 50 million people worldwide. Teachers shared it on social media. Schools used it in professional development. Education programs assigned it to preserve as teachers. And everywhere, people talked about the banquet hall scene, about Julian's dismissal, about my response, about the 45 years of transformation that followed. Julian's comment became infamous, a cautionary tale about the dangers of dismissing your partner's work, about underestimating teachers, about assuming that your career is more important than someone else's. Just a teacher became a rallying cry. Teachers used it ironically, claiming their expertise. I'm just a teacher, you know, someone who transforms lives for a living. Just a teacher, someone with advanced degrees in pedagogy and years of professional expertise. The phrase that was meant to diminish had become a badge of honor, a reminder that teaching mattered, that expertise mattered, that refusing to accept dismissal could change the world. 45 years after the divorce, I was 85 years old and preparing to give my final keynote address. The National Education Conference was honoring the 45th anniversary of the Chen Harrington model with a special ceremony. I stood on the stage, the same stage where I'd given my TED Talk 27 years earlier, looking out at 7,000 educators. My body was older, slower, but my mind was still sharp. And my passion for education was undiminished. 45 years ago, someone called me just a teacher. That comment set in motion everything that came after. The divorce, the education initiative, the transformation of schools across this nation. All of it started because I refused to accept dismissal. I paused, looking at the faces in the audience. But here's what I want you to understand. I'm not special. I'm not uniquely talented or extraordinarily gifted. I'm just a teacher who refused to be small, who insisted that my work mattered, who built a career on the fundamental principle that educators deserve respect. Another pause. And every single one of you can do the same. Not necessarily by developing a national education model, though some of you might, but by refusing to accept dismissal, by insisting on your own expertise, by teaching your students and colleagues and communities that teaching is sophisticated professional practice, that we are not just anything, that we are educators, and that's the most important work there is. I stepped forward, off the stage slightly, standing among the audience. So when someone tells you you're just a teacher, don't argue with them. Don't get defensive. Just do the work. Build something so substantial, so transformative, so undeniably important that their dismissal becomes irrelevant. Prove them wrong, not with words, but with impact. And know that you're not alone. That millions of teachers before you have faced dismissal and refused to accept it. That this work matters. That you matter. My final words. Teaching isn't just what I do. It's who I am. It's who we all are. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. The audience stood. 7,000 educators, applauding not just for me, but for themselves, for their work, for their expertise, for their refusal to be small. I stood on that stage, 85 years old, looking at the faces of people who dedicated their lives to education, and I knew this was legacy. Not buildings with my name, not awards or recognition, but this thousands of educators refusing to accept dismissal, insisting on their own value, building careers and lives that reflected their genuine worth. Julian had called me just a teacher 45 years ago. He'd meant it as dismissal, as minimization, as a way to suggest that my work was less important than his. He'd been spectacularly, historically wrong, and the past 45 years had proved it. Teaching wasn't just what I did. It was the most important work in the world, and I'd spent my life proving it. That was revenge. That was justice. That was peace. The school bore my name. The education system bore my fingerprints. Millions of students had better education because I'd refused to be small. And somewhere, in some banquet hall, someone else was being dismissed, being told their work was just something, being made to feel small. I hoped they'd refuse, hoped they'd build something, hoped they'd prove that just was a lie, because they were capable of it. We all were. We just had to refuse to accept dismissal and start building. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was what mattered. Not that I'd been extraordinary, but that I'd refused to be small. And that refusal had changed everything. I died at 87, peacefully in my sleep, with Marcus beside me. The funeral was held at the Chen Harrington Academy, the school that bore my name and housed my legacy. 7,000 people attended. Teachers, students, policymakers, educators from across the country and around the world. The governor gave a eulogy. The Secretary of Education spoke. Former students, now teachers and principals and superintendents themselves, shared stories about my impact on their lives. But the most meaningful eulogy came from Maya Santos, the student who'd approached me at the 40th anniversary ceremony. She was now a principal herself, leading an elementary school that implemented my model. Dr. Chen Harrington taught me two things, Maya said from the podium. First, that teaching is the most important work in the world. And second, that we don't have to accept other people's limited vision of what we're capable of achieving. She was told she was just a teacher. She responded by transforming education nationally, by building something so substantial, so meaningful, so undeniably important that the dismissal became absurd. That's the lesson. That's what she gave us. Not just a model for education, but a model for living, for refusing to be small, for building something that matters. After the funeral, Maya and the other school leaders announced a new initiative, the Chen Harrington Fellowship for Teacher Leadership, a program that would identify and support classroom teachers doing innovative work, providing them with resources and support to develop their ideas into broader reforms. Dr. Chen Harrington started as a classroom teacher and changed education nationally. Maya explained at the press conference announcing the fellowship. This program will support other teachers doing the same. Because teaching isn't a stepping stone to something more important. Teaching is the work. And teachers deserve support to build on their expertise and transform systems. The fellowship funded 10 teachers annually. Within 5 years, those teachers had developed innovations that spread across their districts. Within 10 years, several had moved into state-level policy work. Within 20 years, one became Secretary of Education. That was legacy. Not just what I'd built, but what others built using the foundation I'd created. The refusal to accept dismissal that spread from me to Maya to countless other teachers, who insisted on their own value and expertise. The Chen Harrington model continued to evolve after my death. New research informed its implementation. New technologies were integrated thoughtfully. New voices shaped its direction. But the core principles remained. Respect for teacher expertise. High expectations paired with comprehensive support. Student learning centered over test scores. 50 years after my divorce from Julian, 37 years after his death, a researcher published a comprehensive history of education reform in America. An entire chapter was devoted to the Chen Harrington model and its transformative impact. The chapter opened with a quote, "When people ask what my wife does, I have to tell them she's just a teacher." Julian Harrington, 1985. And then the analysis. That one comment, meant as dismissal, launched the most significant education reform movement in modern American history. Dr. Victoria Chen Harrington responded to her husband's minimization, not with anger, but with action. She built a comprehensive education model that transformed schools across the nation. She proved that just a teacher was capable of extraordinary impact. And she left a legacy that continues to shape education today, decades after her death. The researcher interviewed hundreds of teachers implementing the model. All of them knew the story. All of them had been told they were just something at some point. All of them had chosen to refuse that dismissal and build something meaningful. Dr. Chen Harrington showed us that teaching isn't small work, one teacher said. That we don't have to accept limited definitions of what we're capable of achieving. She gave us permission to be as large as we're capable of being. That was the real legacy. Not the model itself, though that mattered. Not the schools or the recognition or the national impact, though all of that was significant, but the permission, the example, the proof that refusing to be small could change the world. Julian had meant just a teacher, as an insult, as diminishment, as a way to suggest I was less than him. Instead, he'd given me a gift, a moment of clarity, a realization that I'd been accepting less than I deserved, and a determination to prove that teaching was the most important work in the world. The school still bears my name. 100 years after that banquet hall comment, it will probably still bear my name. Students will walk through doors labeled Chen Harrington Academy and learn about the woman who'd taught there, who'd built an education model, who'd transformed systems nationally. Some will know the story, about the husband who dismissed her, about the comment that had launched everything, about the refusal to be small that had changed education. Others won't know the details. They'll just know that this school, their school, is named after someone who believed teaching mattered, who built something worth remembering, who left a legacy of insisting that educators deserved respect. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. Because in the end, Julian's comment didn't define me. My response did. My refusal did. My work did. He'd called me just a teacher. I'd proved that teaching could change the world. And that refusal to accept dismissal, that insistence on my own worth, that determination to build something meaningful that was the real revenge, not hurting him, not punishing him, but succeeding so thoroughly that his opinion became irrelevant. The school bore my name. The movement carried my fingerprints. Millions of students had better education because I'd refused to be small. That was justice. That was peace. That was legacy. Julian had been wrong. Spectacularly, historically, legendarily wrong. And I'd spent my life proving it.